The story begins at Kang Minkyung's house as she prepares for her first day at the office. Minkyung's mother and brothers showered her with praise for her outfit, commenting on how cool and grown up she looked in those clothes. While others praised her, Minkyung couldn't shake off the thought of the cost of her dress. She calculated it, realizing it was costing her 1,001 per day, which made her a little tense. Minkyung's mother grew a little worried seeing her daughter's actions. She was already tense for Minkyung because it was her first day at the office, and she knew that office life was completely different from school. She advised Minkyung about office work life, emphasizing that there would be many challenges ahead. However, she told her to remember 3 key things. Firstly, to obey what her superiors say and to do what others ask of her. Secondly, she stressed the importance of always wearing a smile, no matter what the circumstances. And following these 3 principles, Minkyung achieved remarkable success in her office life. She excelled in every task, consistently ranking at the top. After 10 years of dedicated work, she reached a significant milestone by becoming the youngest assistant manager in her company's history. Her commitment to obedience, adaptability, and positivity paved the way for her impressive career growth. The twist came when Minkyung was called into the managing director Jun Seob's office. There, she received unexpected news. She was being reassigned to the position of personal secretary to Lee Seob. Hearing this, Minkyung felt a mixture of shock and anger. She couldn't understand why she was being demoted from the position of assistant manager. Despite her emotions, she remained calm and composed as she asked if she had done something wrong to warrant this change. Jun responded, explaining that it was quite the opposite of what Minkyung was thinking. He reassured her that he didn't want to lose his best manager. However, the issue was that she was the only one capable of handling Lee Seob. He hinted that she would soon receive a proposal from Songbiki regarding this matter. Songbiki, a place serving as a symbol of Korea's business community, was known for its prestige. The mansion was nestled within the estate of group leader Sehwon. Now, faced with an offer from Sehwon himself, Minkyung couldn't deny the opportunity. However, she found herself in a dilemma, unsure if this offer would be the best opportunity of her life or the biggest crisis she'd ever faced. The scene shifted to the airport where Lee Seob had just returned from his trip. He appeared elated, striding confidently through the terminal. Suddenly, he heard someone calling his name. It was none other than the assistant manager, Kim Ki-chan. Kim-ki greeted Lee and inquired about his journey, expressing gratitude for his hard work. However, the reality was quite different. Lee hadn't gone on a business trip at all. He had simply taken a vacation to alleviate his frustration from working tirelessly for 34 hours straight. Unbeknownst to Kim-ki, Lee had fallen victim to Jun Seob's scheme, resulting in the loss of crucial business opportunities. So, feeling disillusioned, Lee decided to leave the company to see if it could function without him. The scene then shifts to the car where Lee instructs Kim-ki to drive to the Cheongdam apartment. However, Kim-ki reveals that there was an order for them to go directly to the strategic planning division the moment Lee returned. Lee Seob became angry at the change of plans and instructed Kim-ki to head to the office instead. However, just as they were about to leave, Lee received a call from Jun Seob. Ignoring the call, Lee instructed Kim-ki to continue on their way. After some time, Kim-ki's phone rang, and Lee became frustrated, assuming it was Jun Seob calling again. However, Kim-ki informed him that it was actually a call from Minkyung, the assistant manager of the electronic department. As Kim-ki spoke with her, Lee couldn't help but wonder why she was suddenly calling the director directly. Suddenly, Kim-ki handed the phone to Lee, who felt nervous at the thought of speaking directly with Minkyung. With a shaky voice, Lee asked how he could help her. To his surprise, Minkyung informed him that from that day forward, she would be his personal secretary and business aide. Hearing this, Lee was surprised, wondering why someone of Minkyung's high rank would become his secretary. He asked if Jun Seob had forced her into this role, but Minkyung just smiled and suggested that Lee speak directly with Jun about it. Lee grew furious with Jun, angrily telling Minkyung to stop joking and to refrain from being harsh on someone who had just returned from a trip. He declared that he was going to take a rest and abruptly ended the call. Though Minkyung wasn't pleased with Lee's behavior, she maintained a smile and informed Jun that Lee had ended the call. Jun instructed Minkyung to proceed with the schedule he had given her. The next day, Lee was sleeping peacefully when suddenly his phone rang, disturbing his slumber. He groggily picked up the call, expecting to hear Kim-ki's voice, but instead, he heard another unfamiliar voice on the line. Perplexed, Lee wondered about the identity of the caller. Before he could fully process the situation, Kim-ki informed him that the assistant manager wanted to meet him. Lee was shocked, wondering if Kim-ki was referring to Minkyung. He also couldn't help but wonder how Minkyung had managed to find the location of his place. Minkyung took over the conversation from Kimki, and Lee asked her why a deputy director of the company would come directly to his office door. Minkyung calmly explained that she was his secretary and would be assisting him in everything from that moment on. Lee found it hard to believe and asked if she was telling the truth. Minkyung confirmed that it was indeed the orders from Song Biki. Minkyung then apologized, explaining that she was running late and would come directly inside the room. Hearing this, Lee panicked, realizing he wasn't dressed in proper attire. Frantically, he hurried to put on his pants and shirt as quickly as possible, shouting for everyone to stop while he rushed to get ready. As Minkyung opened the door and greeted Lee, she was taken aback to see him hastily putting on his pants. Lee, feeling extremely embarrassed by the situation, blushed and stammered apologies as he tried to compose himself in front of her. Minkyung was stunned and went back outside the room, closing the door. After some time, Lee got ready and came out of the room. Minkyung asked Lee if he was ready, mentioning that there were only 15 minutes left. Lee responded that he wasn't ready yet because he still needed to take a shower and have breakfast, but he realized he didn't have any clean clothes to wear. Surprised, Minkyung exclaimed something to Kimki, and to their surprise, Kimki appeared with clothes and some sandwiches. Minkyung shared that their clothes were already prepared in advance, and they also had food ready to go. Lee shared that he didn't eat sandwiches, but Minkyung was prepared for that too, having made them according to his preferences. With no more excuses left, Minkyung informed Lee that she would share the detailed schedules with him as they moved further. Hearing this, Lee asked if Minkyung was going to track him even on his phone just because she was his secretary. He expressed that he didn't want her to interfere in his private life. He asked again if she would be comfortable with him moving around in shorts and being undressed. Minkyung responded that maybe she could, but she also asked if Lee was uncomfortable just because she was a woman. Lee, upon hearing Minkyung's response, paused for a moment and then burst into loud laughter. He indicated that he didn't have any problem with her being with him, as it was a normal part of his daily routine to be around women. Due to Lee's loud laughter, Minkyung wasn't entirely happy, but she put on a smile and expressed that she was glad Lee saw her in a comfortable light. She reminded him that they only had 10 minutes left before they needed to leave the place. Suddenly panicking, Minkyung realized that 10 minutes wouldn't be enough time for a shower, so she asked Kimki once again to bring the wet towel. She explained that she had anticipated this possibility and had prepared the wet towel in advance. They moved forward towards Lee to bathe him with a towel, but Lee got frustrated and shouted at them to stay away from him. He then asked them to wait for 5 minutes as he would go and wash up himself. While going inside the room, Lee thought about Minkyung's loose-fitting hair, dull eyeglasses, and two-piece suit, the same dressing sense she had 10 years ago when he first met her. Despite this, he didn't like the way she subtly pushed him. Lee started remembering the old times when there was the annual office function, and Minkyung was receiving the award for #1 employee. And the next place was for Lee. Lee wasn't happy as he always worked hard to achieve everything and had always been ranked first everywhere. However, it was the first time he got second place, all because of Minkyung. From that moment on, Lee harbored a deep resentment towards Minkyung for it. In the present time, Lee was using a hairdryer. He then asked Minkyung if there were only 5 minutes left. She responded with a yes. Lee found himself wondering why she had to be his secretary despite having so many other employees available. Lee then shared with Minkyung that he disliked having close personal secretaries. Minkyung responded by saying that she would try her best to please him with her work. Lee interrupted again, saying that he knew she was good at playing dumb, but he had also managed to endure people he disliked. Still, he believed it wouldn't work out because he didn't like her. The moment they were assigned to the same group, he felt a strong hatred towards her. In reality, Lee was trying to provoke her into anger by saying all that, hoping she would quit the job, but to his surprise, Minkyung shared that they were 7 minutes ahead of the scheduled time and asked him to go with them as Director Tae-seon was waiting for him. Seeing her good-natured behavior, he was shocked, and he had no choice but to go with them. So, they proceeded further, but Minkyung wasn't looking happy. While on the way, Minkyung was also thinking about the words Lee said to her that he didn't like her. It was the same for her too. She was also someone who didn't like him ever since she met him 10 years ago. She thought to herself that Lee was not a prince. He was just the brat son of the owner. In the car, Lee sat very quietly, while Minkyung was seething with anger towards him. However, despite her anger, when she looked at Lee, she couldn't deny that he was exactly the type of person she wanted for herself. The scene shifted to the time when Minkyung went for a meeting with President T. Sihwan. Sihwan shared that June always praised her for her work, implying she must be a good worker. Sihwan then directly shifted the conversation to assisting Lee in his work. Minkyung tried to deny the assignment, citing her busy schedule and areas for improvement. However, before she could elaborate further, Sihwan began discussing her twin brothers. Sihwan shared that he had heard about her brothers, noting their promising careers as athletes. He mentioned that if they both took after her, it would be excellent for them, as their TK group loves supporting talented athletes. Upon hearing this, Minkyung understood that it was the offer director Jun Seob had mentioned. The scene then depicts her coming out of the office, visibly terrified by the president's imposing presence, which resembled that of a tiger to her. Somehow managing her fear, Minkyung found herself thinking about her twin brothers when suddenly she received a call from them. She answered the call and greeted them warmly. Both Minwon and Minjun shouted her name happily, excited to share the news that they had received sponsorship from TK Group. Upon hearing the news, Minkyung congratulated them happily. Despite her own tension regarding her next task, she found solace in her brother's success, which made her happy to undertake the work ahead. The scene then shifts to the present, where Minkyung was trying to compose herself. She knew she had to learn how to handle Lee Seob for the sake of her family. So, on her first day as a secretary, Minkyung accompanied Lee as they arrived at Songbiki, where Lee was interacting with his grandfather, T. Sihwan. Lee presented some gifts to Sihwan, remarking that they resembled the items Sihwan used to bring back from Austria when he was a child. Lee then inquired about Sihwan's health, and they both interacted very happily with each other. While observing Sihwan, Minkyung was very shocked, as his demeanor was completely different from the last time she had met him. He was so kind and jovial with Lee, which surprised her greatly. Minkyung thought that Lee was the only one who could bring out this jovial nature in President Sihwan. Suddenly, Sihwan called Minkyung and asked if she was carrying out her duties properly. Seeing the sudden change in Sihwan's facial expression, Minkyung felt tense and responded that due to it being her first day, she might be lacking a bit. Sihwan agreed with her, mentioning her slight tardiness on her first day. Minkyung felt scared and sat tensely. Seeing her demeanor, Lee wondered what had happened to her, as she was now acting completely opposite to how she had been with him just a while ago. Sihwan furiously expressed his expectations for her regarding the work. Minkyung, feeling pressured, nodded and agreed to everything, promising that she would do her work properly, no matter what. Sihwan also shared with Lee that, as the core of TK, he should be assisted by the best production personnel. Lee agreed with Sihwan's sentiment, acknowledging that there was no one else like Minkyung. However, he attempted to convey something to his grandfather regarding Minkyung. Seeing this, Minkyung became tense, fearing that Lee might say something negative about her. As Lee was about to share something, Minkyung grew scared and started praising him, urging him not to say a word. So she reached out and pulled his hand towards her, attempting to give him a sign, but he looked at her and continued speaking. This time, she held his hand very tightly and made a scared face towards him, silently pleading for him to stop. Feeling a bit nervous due to Minkyung's reaction, Lee tried to speak again. This time, Sihwan asked him to clearly express what he wanted to say. With a sense of relief, Lee happily shared that he was very pleased that Sihwan had assigned Minkyung as his personal secretary. The scene then shifted to Minkyung's apartment, where she was feeling very tired and contemplating taking a shower to relax. However, as she entered the flat, both of her twin brothers ran towards her to greet her. It was here that we were introduced to Leah, Minkyung's roommate. Leah shared that she had prepared a surprise party upon hearing the good news from the twins. Minkyung smiled and expressed her excitement for the party. Then, Leah and the twin brothers went to attend to their leftover tasks. Here, Minkyung was pondering over the responsibilities and other matters concerning the raising of kids. Afterward, she took a bath, and Leah came to her, sharing that Appa was also joining them at the party. Hearing this, Minkyung confirmed if Leah was talking about Hyeon Seong Appa. Before Leah could respond, Appa entered the room, and Leah left without saying anything. Minkyung, while getting ready, was able to overhear the conversation outside. After getting ready, when she opened the door, Appa saw her and asked how she was. Minkyung smiled upon seeing him and replied that she was fine. Minkyung then asked why Hyeon hadn't told her he was coming. Hyeon smiled and patted her head, remarking that she hadn't changed at all. Hearing this, Minkyung became a little shy and then, with a smile, asked if he was talking about her shirt. Hyun responded with a yes, noting that she hadn't changed at all, still liking the character of Kanduka. Minkyung then began sharing about their bond, mentioning how growing up together had made them like a family, close to each other. When she got admitted to the university before her peers, Hyun and Leah were the ones who supported her, becoming her best childhood memories. She could also mention that Hyun, her senior, became a reliable brother to her, as he helped in most cases and supported her when she entered college. Then the party started, and everyone was drinking beers except Minkyung. Leah laughed at her, teasing that she didn't know the taste of beer, claiming it to be the best pleasure in life. Minkyung responded that it wasn't a big deal for her to go without drinking beer for a few days. Leah then began congratulating the twins for the sponsorship and Hyun for being scouted by the M&P law firm. Minwon shared that it was amazing to be hired by the M&P firm and asked if Hyun was coming back to Korea to stay. Hyun responded with a yes and shared that he was assigned to the trading team of TK. He then asked Minkyung about her team. Minkyung shared that she had also recently started working in the trading team. Leah then interrupted Minkyung and confirmed if today was her first day as secretary. Hearing this, Hyun was a little surprised. Leah then began acting as a reporter and asked Minkyung how she felt about being the secretary of the great T. Lee Seob. Minkyung made a weird face and asked if she really needed to share about it. Leah got confused and asked why she was making a sour face. According to Leah, T. Lee Seob was the only grandson of TK Group's T. Sehwan, one of the greatest conglomerates. As the prominent heir, he grew up capturing the attention of the nation with his distinctive aristocratic image, which attracted media and reporters. This might be why Lee started avoiding media exposures and all. Leah then also commented on Lee's looks and asked Minkyung if it wasn't hard for her to believe that there were no feelings attached to being beside a Keeball heir who was so handsome that his photos could be traded. She mentioned that being a special assistant to Lee meant a great promotion. Hearing this, Minkyung acted weird and shared that she would be lucky if she didn't get fired. Leah was a little shocked hearing that and asked Minkyung for a clear explanation as to why she was saying that. Minkyung then slowly revealed that Lee didn't like her at all. Everyone got shocked hearing that and asked for the reason. Minkyung shared that both she and Lee had joined the company around the same time, but they had never talked to each other, so she was sure Lee had hated her since their time at the training center. Minkyung also admitted that they both hated each other, but somehow they had to work together because of the situation. Hyun then shared his thoughts, expressing that she must get tired of being around T. Lee Seob when they both didn't like each other. Hyun then asked if her first day was so hard. Minkyung agreed, acknowledging that it was hard, but she was also happy knowing that she would get incentives for it. Minkyung was holding her shoulders when suddenly Hyun came over and started massaging them. She shared that she was okay and he didn't need to do that, but Hyun continued massaging and emphasized that money is important, but she should prioritize her health. Hyun then praised her for always working very hard and mentioned that it was her main problem. Minkyung responded with a thanks and promised to do her best as she could. She also praised that maybe her boss would be as nice as half of Hyun Appa. But as she was thinking about it, suddenly she got messages from Lee directly ordering her the works and arrival timing. Seeing the messages, she got frustrated as he should have said it in a nicer way. On the next day when Minkyung reached the office, Lee shared that she was 30 minutes late. Minkyung countered, saying she was on time, but she got delayed because the entrance password had been changed. Hearing this, Lee acted as if he didn't know why the password got changed. Despite feeling frustrated, Minkyung remained calm and shared that she had rescheduled the tasks to accommodate the delay. Lee responds with okay. Minkyung then told him that they would start the briefing when he was ready. Lee shared that he was very tired. Hearing this, Minkyung took out the coffee she had brought for him, but Lee denied drinking the coffee, stating that he only drinks coffee from Kenya with a specific amount of preferences. He asked Minkyung to pour the coffee down the drain. Lee then shared that he would take a rest. Minkyung informed him that he would be late for the meeting with T-Jun Seob. Hearing this, Lee regretted waking up so early and asked Minkyung to cancel the meeting. Minkyung became very terrified over that order as it was the first time her patience level got tested. Lee asked for her point of view on the matter. Minkyung then gathered her courage and expressed that she wanted to make a request to him. After some time, Minkyung gave the brief of the schedule, with the fashion division being last. Lee then asked Minkyung if she had put the fashion division last because it was the toughest work. TK Fashion is the foundation of TK Group and was underperforming, causing a big headache for the TK Group. Lee was very frustrated, questioning why they kept assigning him such projects that were underperforming and likely to be sold. Lee was also frustrated with June because despite his efforts on everything, June took the profitable parts and assigned all the trouble to him. Because of this, Lee was considering quitting his job. Seeing all that, Min-kyung was tense because Lee didn't seem to be working at all. She was wondering about the best way to proceed further with him. Min-kyung was reminiscing about the old version of Lee when they were competitors. Back then, she thought of him as worthy given his nickname, the Crown Prince. Suddenly, Lee said something weird, causing Min-kyung to act shocked, but she quickly composed herself. Lee asked her not to deny the fact that the great assistant manager Kang, who was doing great, was now shifted under Lee Seob. Min-kyung denied it, stating that she always considered it an honor to work under the executive director. Suddenly, Lee stood up and approached Min-kyung, commenting on her dry lips, noting that despite their condition, she still dared to tell such lies. Min-kyung got a little terrified by Lee's actions, so she asked him not to do that again. As Lee was going back to his seat, Min-kyung was left thinking, holding her lips, wondering if she would be okay in this job or not. The scene then shifted to 10 years ago when the 53rd annual training group was underway. Everyone was being greeted upon their arrival. At the party, Lee had been stalking Min-kyung for quite some time, as he had been told by his grandpa that there was someone who had come out on top, defeating everyone else. Tae-seon asked Lee to take a good look at Min-kyung, to see if she was material worthy of being a pillar or someone with a sharp mind. In the next scene, Lee was explaining some work to others, but he kept glancing over at Min-kyung. Here, we also witnessed other girls praising Lee for his looks, acknowledging that as the president's third generation, Lee had everything going for him. The girls talked about him a lot, then moved on, murmuring and smiling. Lee shared that he was accustomed to receiving that type of attention and that all the girls didn't look into his eyes, but he didn't enjoy any of it. Lee preferred the quiet and living alone, so he found solace in resting at a secluded place. Suddenly, Min-kyung passed by near him, and Lee noticed her, turning his gaze towards her. To his surprise, Min-kyung was the one who directly looked into his eyes. Lee was surprised because she was the first person who didn't avoid eye contact. From this incident, Lee started feeling oddly uneasy. However, it was all just a dream. The scene then shifted back to the present time, where Min-kyung's voice could be heard shouting that she was coming in. Lee once again tried to stop her from entering the room, but before he could say anything, she walked in. Min-kyung shared that she had brought the document for Lee to sign and approve. Lee shouted at her, asking why she didn't give him time to respond. But as he shouted, he looked at her and felt the same feelings he had felt 10 years ago upon seeing her. Min-kyung then apologized, explaining that she hadn't realized he was sleeping. She proceeded to discuss the report on the resort project. Lee was stunned when he saw the report, as it was organized so perfectly that it was very simple and easy to understand. But showing his rudeness, he threw the report and the table, asking Min-kyung to work more reasonably, stating that even if he worked hard, there would be nothing left, and no one would acknowledge it. He then shared his thoughts that the company wouldn't fall apart if he wasn't there and asked for Min-kyung's opinion on the matter. Min-kyung disagreed with Lee's thinking, stating that Executive Director Lee was essential for the trading department. Furthermore, Min-kyung mentioned that there wasn't an employee in the company who didn't know how hard Lee worked for the company, expressing her gratitude. Hearing this, Lee was shocked. Later, he asked her to leave and said he would check the reports later. Min-kyung agreed and asked Lee to share with her if he wanted any changes in the reports. Lee remained confused about Min-kyung. The scene then shifted to a later time where Jun Seob finally met with Lee Seob. Jun asked Lee about his work, as Lee had previously told Jun that he would not continue working. However, upon returning from his trip, Lee was doing all his work top-notch. Lee shared that he had done nothing, it was all the work of Min-kyung. Jun then expressed happiness over his idea of keeping Min-kyung as Lee's secretary. Lee then asked Jun about the excuse he used to prepare Min-kyung for the work, wondering if Jun had found any weaknesses in her. Jun laughed and asked if Lee really didn't know yet. He then revealed that Lee should have already known, as the director of public relations, Yoon Mok, had been involved in it. Jun then shared about Min-kyung's brothers, mentioning that they were potential skaters. Lee furiously asked if it was uncertain to sponsor them just based on their potential. Jun laughed again and asked if Lee really thought their sponsorship was based on their performance. Lee then understood the situation and asked if they were seriously using the sponsorship as a weakness to make Min-kyung agree to the work. So, Jun responded with a question, asking who told Lee to escape work by going overseas. He also mentioned that Min-kyung's brothers needed to be competent enough to fill his vacancy. Lee then started explaining his research findings. According to his research, Min-kyung's parents ran a modest noodle restaurant, so if her brothers pursued sports, it must have been a financial burden for her. And so, if the offer came from Song Biki, Min-kyung couldn't refuse it. June then started to reassure Lee, saying that everything was going fine as Minkyung was handling his work. He suggested that Lee might be worrying unnecessarily about Minkyung. Lee also found himself surprised and wondered if he was truly worried about Minkyung. Initially, he dismissed the idea as impossible, but later he started to ponder whether it was because of Minkyung's touch or the pleading expression she had made in front of him. Lee couldn't quite grasp the main issue. He just felt a bit uncomfortable. The scene shifted to the next day afternoon, where Lee enjoyed his relaxing time with a cup of coffee. Suddenly, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching his room. Lee was startled by the sudden noise, but to his surprise, it was none other than Minkyung. Minkyung opened the gate and inquired about Lee's break, mentioning that she was about to brief him on the afternoon schedule. Startled, Lee asked her to wait a moment, explaining that her sudden arrival had put him on edge. However, Minkyung didn't wait and began briefing the schedule, catching Lee off guard as he wasn't prepared for it at that moment. From then on, Lee's life felt like a thriller, his heart racing every time he heard footsteps nearing him. In the car ride with Kimki, Lee vented his frustration, sharing how Minkyung never stayed still for a second. He couldn't understand why he felt nervous despite being the boss himself. Kimki chuckled and remarked that Minkyung's passion was the reason she worked tirelessly. Lee's frustration with his situation was palpable, and he found solace only when he was in the car, traveling to other places. That's why he asked Kimki to drive around in circles for the third time, hoping it would help him relax. Suddenly, Kimki's phone rang, and it was Minkyung calling. Lee panicked and urged Kimki not to answer, but it was too late. Kimki had already picked up the phone. Desperate to avoid the conversation, Lee quickly instructed Kimki to inform Minkyung that he wasn't in the car with him. A strange voice emanated from the phone, claiming to hear Lee's voice and questioning why he was outside without any scheduled plans. Lee hesitated and mumbled, suggesting that there must be some work for him to attend to outside. However, Minkyung quickly refuted his explanation, stating that it couldn't be possible for her not to know about his schedule and whereabouts. Minkyung then informed Lee that he had a lot of work to do and requested him to return quickly. Lee responded that he was a bit busy, so he would come back after some time. Minkyung smiled and reassured him, saying she understood, and she would wait for him to return. The scene shifted to later that night, where Minkyung was venting her frustrations to Leah about having to work overtime. Leah tried to calm her down, but suddenly the doorbell rang. Leah speculated that it might be Hyun Appa. Minkyung became a bit happier upon hearing this. She asked Hyun about his arrival, inquiring whether he had come directly to the house after finishing work. Hyun confirmed, expressing his desire to meet everyone. Leah laughed and suggested that Hyun probably wanted to eat a meal cooked by Minkyung's mother. Hyun agreed, admitting that he couldn't miss out on that opportunity. Minkyung then began preparing the meal for Hyun. So both Minkyung and Hyun started cooking, but Leah asked them to not work too hard and to take a rest. Suddenly, Hyun remembered something and asked Leah about his blind date for the next day. Hearing that question, Leah panicked and tensely asked Hyun how he knew about it. Hyun then explained that the person she was going on a blind date with was his elementary school friend, and his friend had messaged him about it. Leah was shocked upon hearing this. Hyun also shared that because of Leah's blunt reply, his friend had contacted him to ask whether he had done something wrong. Leah laughed a bit and asked if the boy had said anything else. Hyun tells Leah that his friend had asked about her likes, dislikes, and favorite restaurant. Leah again confirmed if Hyun had shared anything more. Hyun remembered that he had also mentioned that his friend found her cute and stylish. Minkyung focused on the words cute and stylish, while Leah started acting strangely and asked Hyun to leave, warning him that he would be late otherwise. Hyun agreed to go and asked Minkyung to thank her mother for the meal. Minkyung was very tense after Hyun left, wondering what she should do now. Leah tried to calm her down, but the truth was that the girl going on the blind date with Hyun's friend wasn't Leah, but actually Minkyung herself. Let's go to the real story. 3 days ago, Leah was pressuring Minkyung to go on her behalf. Leah mentioned the hotel's French restaurant, emphasizing that it was an expensive place with excellent cuisine. Minkyung wasn't happy at that time because she didn't know what to do on a blind date with someone she didn't know. Seeing Minkyung's distress, Leah made a pleading face, asking for her help, explaining that it was the last concert of her favorite heroes before they went to the military. Leah further convinced Minkyung, explaining how she had obtained the concert ticket with great difficulty and couldn't afford to miss the show. To sweeten the deal, Leah made an offer to Minkyung. If she helped her with the date, Leah would take care of all the household chores alone for the next 6 months without asking for Minkyung's help. Minkyung declined the offer, feeling it was unnecessary for Leah to take on all the household chores. Finally, she agreed to go in Leah's place. However, the main problem was that Leah was a skilled fashion designer, knowledgeable about fashion and cost-effective ways to dress. Minkyung felt tense about impersonating Leah. Leah reassured her, saying that the greatest fashion designer was with her, and she would help transform Minkyung into Leah's likeness. Minkyung initially tried to refuse, but Leah insisted on doing her makeup, promising to make Minkyung look more like Leah than herself, creating a brand new Minkyung. The day of the dinner appointment arrived, and Leah was thrilled to do Minkyung's makeup to help her look her best for the date. Leah asked if Minkyung was ready, but Minkyung hesitated, showing uncertainty. Leah clarified that she was inquiring about Minkyung's mindset. Minkyung responded with a hesitant yes. Without further delay, Leah grabbed Minkyung's hand and hurried her towards the mirror to start doing her makeup. Minkyung sat at the table while Leah began introducing both of them in front of the mirror. Confused, Minkyung asked what Leah was trying to accomplish. Leah replied, saying she was pretending to be a makeup blogger for fun. Without delay, Leah asked Minkyung if they could start doing makeup. Taking out the emulsion, she began applying it to Minkyung's face, all the while showering her with compliments about her features. Minkyung, still puzzled, asked Leah what she was up to. Leah explained that she was simply role-playing as a makeup artist. After spending some time on the makeup application, they finished everything, and Minkyung's makeup was finally complete. Minkyung walked over to the full-length mirror and gazed at her reflection. She was amazed and couldn't believe that the person staring back at her was none other than herself. Leah urged her to calm down, reminding her that it wasn't the time to be amazed because they still had one more thing left to do, choosing Minkyung's outfit. The scene then shifted to M Hotel, where coincidentally, Minkyung also arrived for his alumni reunion with elementary school friends. Kimki greeted Minkyung and wished him good luck for enjoying the party. Lee was also thrilled at the prospect of some free personal time to do as he pleased. Consequently, his friend messaged him, instructing him to head directly to the lounge bar. Unbeknownst to Lee, Minkyung was walking in the opposite direction towards the French restaurant. Minkyung found herself wondering if she was running late, feeling a bit out of place as she had never been to a venue like that before. Inside the hotel, Jeong Jong-woo, the hospital director's son, was waiting for her at the table. Jeong commented that he had expected her to be smaller in stature, having heard that she was the cute type. Minkyung thanked him for the compliment. Jeong then inquired if she liked the food, to which Minkyung responded with a polite yes, even though she didn't actually enjoy it. She was simply biding her time, waiting for the evening to be over. After an hour had passed, they bid each other goodbye. However, Jeong attempted to persuade Minkyung to join him at the lounge bar to try its famous Soul Night cocktail. Politely, Minkyung declined, explaining that she had work the next day and couldn't stay out late. The scene shifted a bit later, and Minkyung felt relieved that her blind date was finally over. In reality, she had felt uncomfortable throughout the evening because it had been a while since she had done her makeup, so she started removing her makeup and lenses to feel free. Suddenly, Minkyung remembered something. Upon arriving, Leah had given her something. It was a ticket for the full package at the lounge. She pondered what to do. While a night with cocktails sounded tempting, she also had work the next day. As Minkyung approached the lounge, she was mesmerized by its stunning appearance, capable of amazing anyone who walked in. Despite her struggles throughout the month, she felt a surge of happiness knowing she had found a place like this to relax. Deciding to embrace the opportunity, she resolved to enjoy the night as a different version of herself. Inside the lounge bar, Lee and his friends were relaxing with cocktails and drinks. Lee's friends were handing him drinks, and Lee was enjoying the taste of each one. One of Lee's friends asked if he was seeing any girl for himself. Lee became confused and asked why they were suddenly talking about it. His friends laughed at his question, explaining that they didn't know when they would next see Lee Seob, so they wanted to ask the question while they had the chance. They asked Lee how long he was planning to stay single and if there was someone in mind, like the daughter of a wealthy person. Lee questioned why they were so interested in other people's lives. In response, they explained that nothing would be more important to them than the love life of the third generation of Keyball. They then proceeded to open a bottle of champagne to celebrate the end of Lee's bachelor life. Lee, feeling tense as everyone seemed so happy and interested in his love life, decided to drink another glass. Suddenly, he heard a familiar noise, reminiscent of Minkyung's footsteps. Upon looking up, he was shocked to see her entering the lounge. Despite seeing her in front of him, Lee wasn't able to recognize Minkyung in that outfit and look. He was just concluding based on the footsteps. Later, he tried to distract himself, thinking it couldn't be possible that she would be at a lounge like that. Still, he had to confirm, so he messaged her about the next day's schedule. The moment he texted her, she picked up the phone and checked the text. Lee focused on the sticker on the phone, as it looked similar to the sticker he had seen on Minkyung's phone. Because of that sticker, he remembered his conversation with Kimki, during which they discussed Minkyung's octopus sticker, which Kimki had described as cute. So he interpreted that there couldn't be any other person than Minkyung who could use that sticker. Suddenly, Lee received a response from Minkyung as soon as she checked her phone. Lee was shocked. The fact that he received a reply right after the girl used her phone meant she was indeed Minkyung. Seeing all that, his friends asked what happened to him, why he was so focused on that girl and looking for a while. All his friends started praising Minkyung's beauty and teasing Lee about his behavior. Eventually, he got frustrated and asked them to keep their voices as low as possible. Lee then shared that he was looking at her because she looked like someone he knew. Meanwhile, Minkyung was lost in thought about the cocktail as Jeong had mentioned Soul Night, sparking her curiosity to try it out. After some time, her Soul Night drink arrived, and she decided to fully enjoy the moment as much as she could. The melodious voice of the piano added to the great atmosphere, making it even more enjoyable for her. She then looked in the mirror and felt happy for looking pretty, but Minkyung's fun was short-lived as she heard a voice shouting Leah's name. It was none other than Jeong who came there, saying that he came for drinking alone, but it looked like he got some fate related to her. Minkyung started feeling troubled as her limit was just one drink, and she had already consumed Soul Night. She was tense at the thought of having to drink more. On the other hand, Lee saw the man and wondered about him, as he knew that the man couldn't be her boyfriend. Jeong then ordered some drinks from Minkyung and asked her to drink, expressing that he always wanted to buy a drink for her. He then honestly shared that he had read all of Leah's blogs, so he knew that she was a cocktail enthusiast who could gulp down at least 3 glasses whenever she came to the bar. Minkyung was tense as she forgot that Leah was a party lover, so she decided to drink another drink and leave from there. While she was drinking, Jeong was telling all the information he had gathered about the cocktails, studying all night before coming on the date. Suddenly, a call came to Jeong, and it was from Hyun. They both talked about Leah, and Jeong laughed, asking whether Hyun was tense about his little sister. Finally, Hyun shared that he was also coming to that side. Minkyung got tense knowing that Hyun was on his way, so she felt the need to leave as soon as possible. When Jeong returned, he apologized for being on the call for so long. She tried to leave, but Jeong asked her to drink one more cocktail. Minkyung, pressed for time, drank the cocktail in one go, ignoring the circumstances. Jeong, seeing that, praised her for downing the drink in one shot. Meanwhile, Lee noticed that she was in trouble. Minkyung started feeling a little dizzy, unable to see Jeong clearly. Minkyung stood up to leave, but Jeong held her up, mentioning that Hyun was coming to pick her up. Minkyung didn't stop and asked Jeong to go first, but he couldn't do that as he could see she was totally intoxicated. Jeong was trying to make her sit down for her own good, but Lee misunderstood the situation and came to save Minkyung. He shouted at Jeong, asking why he was forcing someone to stay with him when she didn't want to. Jeong tried to prove himself innocent, but Lee was angry at him. Meanwhile, Minkyung felt a sense of familiarity upon hearing Lee's voice, but due to her dizziness, she couldn't fully understand or see who it really was. She started feeling nauseous, while Lee began taking off his jacket and shouting at Jeong, accusing him of forcing her to sit with him and demanding to know his real intentions. Jeong panicked and tried to prove himself innocent by taking out his visiting card. At that moment, when Lee held Minkyung, she finally saw that it was her company's executive director, Lee Seop. The direct eye contact between them made Lee a bit uncomfortable. Minkyung's dress added to his unease, prompting him to shift his gaze in the other direction and cover her body with his jacket. Upon seeing Lee, Minkyung started acting strangely, diverting the conversation to the briefing she needed to attend. This made Lee tense, wondering what Minkyung was up to. He became furious with Jeong upon seeing Minkyung's state, realizing how much alcohol he had given her. Jeong shouted that he had done nothing wrong, insisting they were on a date together. He then handed Lee his visiting card, urging Lee to believe that he wasn't a shameful man. Lee glanced at the card, pondering whether Minkyung had actually gone on a date with someone like Jeong. Jeong then pointed out that Lee was the one who interrupted them and inquired about his identity. Lee replied that he was Minkyung's colleague. Jeong became confused upon hearing that, while Minkyung attempted to interrupt to explain everything. However, in the midst of their exchange, the coat slipped off. Lee crouched down to pick it up, but as he stood up to shout at Minkyung, he found himself in a very awkward position. Upon seeing Minkyung's seductive face, he felt uneasy and quickly put the jacket back on her, aware that everyone in the lounge was watching them. He couldn't help but wonder why she had been drinking so much. Minkyung then apologized to Lee for her behavior. Confused, Jeong asked Lee what he meant by referring to Minkyung as a coworker, as he had been thinking of her as Leah. Suddenly, Hyeon's voice chimed in, revealing that Minkyung was Leah's closest friend and roommate. Hearing this, Jeong was shocked, and he quickly ran towards Hyeon to inquire about the real situation. Hyeon, sensing Jeong's agitation, asked him to calm down and let him explain everything. Lee found himself wondering about Hyeon's identity. Hyeon then approached and confidently stated that he knew Lee was the executive director. He greeted Lee and introduced himself as the legal advisor for the TK group. Lee kept a constant eye on Hyeon, while Minkyung tried to catch glimpses of the newcomer. Suddenly, she visibly noticed Hyeon and became tense, fearing that he might discover the truth, putting Leah in big trouble. Feeling fearful, Minkyung hid behind Lee and tightly held his hand. Lee felt shy and uncomfortable, unsure of what was happening. He wondered if Minkyung was feeling nervous again. Hyeon then suggested that he believed Minkyung was really drunk and offered to take her home from there. Lee, concerned about Minkyung's well-being, reminded Hyeon that as her superior, he couldn't leave her in the hands of a stranger. So Lee inquired about the connection between Minkyung and Hyeon. Hyeon smiled and explained that they were very close friends since childhood, reassuring Lee that there was no need to worry. Hyeon calmly asked Minkyung to come with him, assuring her that he wouldn't say anything to Leah. He then inquired about the reason for her excessive drinking, noting that he wasn't good with alcohol himself. Minkyung confessed that she had drunk 3 glasses of alcohol and a bit of champagne, and nervously asked if he was going to scold her. Lee felt confused about what was happening and tried to understand the expression on Minkyung's face. Hyeon then apologized to Lee, acknowledging that they had caused him a lot of trouble. Hyeon noticed the jacket and realized it must belong to Lee. He asked Minkyung to return the jacket to Lee, but Lee intervened, asking Hyeon to wait. He approached Minkyung and proceeded to close all the buttons of the jacket himself. Lee asked Minkyung to return the jacket back in the office the next day. Hyeon observed them with a strange look before placing a hand on Minkyung's shoulder and gently suggesting that they go back home. Lee felt puzzled about Hyeon's demeanor, but to his surprise, Minkyung refused to go back home. She expressed her desire to spend the night in the lounge to relax, insisting that she would go to the room by herself later. Hyeon reassured Minkyung not to feel tense, as he would take her to her hotel room. Lee found it strange that Hyeon was offering to escort her to the hotel room. Lee intervened by gently holding Hyeon's hand and questioned why he was intending to escort Minkyung to her hotel room, pointing out that he didn't seem like her boyfriend, making it seem strange. Hyeon responded by asking if it was the responsibility of the executive director to escort Minkyung to her hotel room, expressing disbelief that there was anything between Minkyung and Lee. The scene shifted to the next morning, where Lee woke up, pondering the events of the previous day, unsure if they were reality or just a dream. As he washed his face, thoughts raced through his mind about what could have happened after both Minkyung and Hyeon left together. Suddenly, Lee remembered Hyeon's words, asking about his relationship with Minkyung. Deciding to put aside his thoughts, he focused on getting ready for the office, realizing that Minkyung's affairs were none of his business. In the parking area, Minkyung appeared very happy and greeted Lee confidently. Observing her demeanor, Lee thought that Minkyung must have had a good sleep and possibly didn't remember anything about the previous night. So when Minkyung stared at him, he simply turned his face away, not wanting to see her or hear her voice. Lee felt everything at that moment to be annoying, and he grew frustrated, wondering why Minkyung always managed to make him angry. In the office, Minkyung knocked on Lee's door and informed him that his lunch was ready. However, Lee declined the offer, expressing that he had no appetite at the moment. He also asked Minkyung to cancel all his appointments as he wasn't feeling well. Minkyung responded with a simple okay and left the room. Outside, she sat on the ground, feeling tense. She knew she had to return the coat, but all she could do was act as if she didn't remember anything from the previous night. She was also angry with herself, trying to piece together what she had done the previous night. Confusion swirled within her as she debated whether to pretend to know nothing or to go and apologize to Lee. Deep down, she knew that Lee didn't want to see her, and the realization of the reason behind it made her feel ashamed. The scene then shifted to Kimki's car, where Kimki asked Lee about the place he wanted to go. Lee requested to first stop by the office. Kimki then shared that he was taking him to the riverbank, suggesting it would be better to go somewhere open. Lee asked Kimki why he was doing that, questioning if he seemed needy. Kimki responded by saying that he knew Lee only called him when he had a lot on his mind, so he thought of taking him to a comfortable place to help ease his thoughts. Lee was impressed by Kimki's thoughtful behavior. Kimki then mentioned that Minkyung had told him there was nothing better than running by the riverside. Lee, surprised by this revelation, asked if Minkyung also exercised. Kimki shared that Minkyung's hobby was playing sports, and she typically ran approximately 10 kilometers every time she went for a run. He also praised her for her commitment, mentioning that she still made time for exercise even when she had a lot of work to do. Lee started thinking about Minkyung, but suddenly he realized it and shouted at Kimki, telling him he was being too loud and asked him to quiet down. Kimki apologized for his behavior. The scene then shifted to the evening at Songbiki, where the T siblings had gathered. T Soo-jin, Lee's younger sister, asked how Lee ended up joining the family gathering, noting that he was usually the one to make excuses to avoid such occasions. Lee responded by asking why Soo-jin was only talking about him, as he wasn't the only one who made excuses. He then turned to Jun and asked why he had come to Songbiki. Jun shared that he was going to marry Woo Jiang, so he thought it was a good idea for her to meet the president. Soo-jin was impressed by Jun and praised him for his thoughtfulness, saying that her Jun Appa was always awesome. Soo-jin then brought up the video, commenting on its message that if it's between TK group and my woman, one should always prioritize their woman. Lee also praised the sentiment, remarking that it represented the love of the century. Soo-jin showed concern for her older brother Lee, expressing tension because he had never been in a relationship due to his lifelong dedication to work, leaving her feeling internally frustrated and anxious on his behalf. Lee became furious over Soo-jin's remarks and started getting angry. Soo-jin quickly apologized and asked him to calm down. Lee stood up and announced that he was going outside to get some fresh air. Lee also told Jun that he wanted to meet him outside for a moment. After some time, Jun joined Lee outside for a talk. Lee attempted to start a conversation, but Jun immediately began drinking beer in one go without stopping. Seeing Jun's behavior, Lee felt frightened as Jun was ignoring him and wondered if his throat hurt from drinking so quickly. Jun then shared that Soo-jin had told him that women like men who drink in that manner. Lee first asked Jun if he had lost his mind. Jun responded that he was fine and inquired about the reason Lee had called him out. Lee shared that there was a significant reason for calling him out and then proceeded to ask Jun to take Minkyung back into his team since he knew she was the deputy director. Jun directly denied that he didn't want to take Minkyung back on his team. Lee was shocked as Jun didn't even ask the reason for that and directly denied. Jun shared that he had enough qualified members in his team and also mentioned that Minkyung was performing perfectly under Lee. So, he asked Lee for one reason to take Minkyung back on her team. Lee hesitated for a moment, but then responded that working as his secretary wasn't a suitable job for someone like her. Jun then asked why Lee had let her work until now if he thought that way. Lee didn't have an answer for that, so he remained silent. Jun asked again if Lee had any other issues with Minkyung. Lee didn't respond and quietly left. The next morning, Lee was sleeping peacefully, but Soo-jin started shouting at his door, urging him to open it as fast as he could. Soo-jin then showed Lee the news of the day, which was now spreading everywhere as a rumor that Lee was in love with someone. Soo-jin asked Lee to explain the news to him. Lee was shocked to see the news, and it took him some time to believe it. Soo-jin helped him understand that the news was about him being caught with a mysterious woman at Hotel M. Actually, Soo-jin was very happy because until now, his older brother's life had been so private. But it was the first time he appeared in public with some news. Soo-jin then forcefully asked Lee to tell him about the girl and who she was. Lee hesitated to say anything, so Soo-jin decided to guess the girl from the picture. She guessed the girl as Deputy Director Minkyung. Upon hearing her name, Lee was shocked and reacted by asking how she knew about it. Soo-jin then shared that she didn't know anything. She had just made a wild guess, and from his reaction, she could confirm that she was right. Lee became more tense as he realized he had inadvertently exposed himself. Soo-jin then mentioned that it was her first time seeing her brother embracing a woman. Lee asked what she meant by that. Soo-jin responded that usually, he got panicked even making eye contact with interviewers, but with Minkyung, it seemed different. So, she wondered if it was the beginning of an office romance. Lee furiously shouted that it wasn't any type of romance, just some circumstances that happened. Soo-jin wondered if it was really nothing, as his brother needed romance, a romantic relationship. She then shouted at him, asking whether he really wanted to date someone or not. Lee was getting frustrated and asked Soo-jin to get away from him for a little while. Soo-jin then asked whether he was planning to marry that woman out of interest in becoming the true successor of the TK group, and if that's why he had lived his whole life maintaining his chastity. Lee was shocked to hear that and responded that it was nothing like what she was thinking. He told her that it was impossible for him to think about marrying the director or anything else related to it. Lee also shared that he didn't have any intention to date the person, whoever she was. Sujin was just hearing all the things and responding with yes. Out of nowhere, Lee shared that he would date a girl who he would fall in love with at first sight. Hearing that, Sujin started laughing very hard, stating that Lee was the most innocent of their time. Hearing this, Lee shouted at her, saying that she was disrespecting him. Still, Sujin continued laughing and insisted that she respected him. This time, Lee got even more furious and shouted at her to give back the expense card. Sujin laughed and left the room, sharing that she would always support Lee's romantic endeavors and thanking Lee for giving her his credit card. After Sujin left, Lee was furious, but afterward, he fell into deep thought, looking very tense. In the next scene, Minkyung was apologizing to Lee for causing harm to the life of the CEO because of her personal life. Lee responded with a yes, but he also asked her not to apologize for that, as he also made a mistake by interfering in her life, and so it was a shame on him too. Minkyung then shared that it was her failure as the CEO's secretary to allow such news to spread in public, and she promised to do everything to ensure that Lee's reputation didn't get damaged any further. Lee asked her to calm down, reassuring her that it was okay for him, but she wasn't stopping as she felt ashamed of herself. Lee then shouted at her to close the topic and tell him about the appointment he had for that day. Minkyung shared that she had a meeting abroad with a construction company. Lee asked her to go for the meeting, to which Minkyung responded with a yes, and she said she was going to prepare the car for departure. In his life, Lee was pondering about Minkyung and whether there was something that required her to stoop so low for apologizing. Suddenly, Lee realized that it was her job, as dealing with such matters was part of her duties as a secretary. He acknowledged that she was doing her job perfectly. Lee was mad at himself for what he had thought of Minkyung, and the moment they both stepped out of the office, Lee felt the glare of flashlights on them as reporters surrounded them from all sides. All the reporters were clicking pictures of them continuously, which made Lee feel suffocated, and he felt like he was going to vomit. Minkyung noticed his distress and held him to help him recover from the overwhelming situation. Upon holding Lee, Minkyung felt his body trembling, his breathing becoming hard, and his face turning pale. She interpreted it as a possible panic attack. Suddenly, much to their relief, Kimki arrived with a car and asked Minkyung to sit inside with Lee. Minkyung helped Lee into the car, and then both Kimki and Minkyung left through the office gate as quickly as they could. In the car, Minkyung was tense about Lee's health. She tried to wake him up and bring him back to his senses. Suddenly, Lee fell into Minkyung's lap and fainted. In his childhood, Lee was told by Sihun that everyone in the world was watching him. Since then, Lee developed a fear of camera lights and reporters. Sihun always told him that he needed to be perfect and couldn't let his guard down. He reminded Lee that he was the face and future of TK Group. Once, during a family photo session, the cameraman asked everyone to smile, and as the flash went off, Lee fainted. He then woke up in the hospital, realizing it was all just a dream. Upon waking up, Lee still felt a little dizzy, but he tried to get up. As he did, he remembered the recent moment with Minkyung. Suddenly, he noticed Minkyung sleeping on the sofa in front of him. Lee wondered if Minkyung had stayed by his side the whole time. He checked the time and noticed that she hadn't left, even though office hours were over. Lee attempted to approach her, but Minkyung woke up at the sound of footsteps. She stood up, and both found themselves in an uncomfortable situation. Minkyung then held Lee and asked him to sit back on the bed as he wasn't fully recovered yet. Lee insisted that Minkyung should go home and rest, as he was feeling better now. Minkyung felt sad and responded that she wasn't going back because she hadn't managed the CEO case in advance. Putting on her glasses, she switched back into work mode, determined to handle the situation. She mentioned that he had been skipping meals a lot lately, so she insisted on taking care of that before leaving. Lee felt embarrassed and asked her not to worry, saying he wasn't a child. Minkyung asked him to wait a moment, and after a minute, she returned with some healthy food for him. Placing the food in front of him, she insisted that no matter what, he had to eat it, whether he liked it or not. She then happily shared that Lee didn't need to worry about today's incident as she had taken care of everything to ensure nothing would leak out. Lee thanked her for that, but at that moment, a rumbling sound came from Minkyung's stomach. Both felt uncomfortable, but to lighten the mood, Lee laughed and asked Minkyung to go get her meal too, threatening not to eat unless she did. While eating, Lee shared his thoughts, admitting that he always thought of her as if she were robust. Minkyung became confused and asked what he meant. Lee explained that just like she was sitting in front of him eating with her shaggy hair, she also had a human side to her. Minkyung thought Lee was asking her to arrange something, so she offered to do it right away. However, Lee asked her to stop, clarifying that he didn't mean it like that. Lee then shared that it was his first time losing consciousness. He began to recount his story, mentioning that when he was 20, his parents were a little strict, always emphasizing that he must appear perfect to others from an early age. Lee also shared the reason why he asked her to be careful in her behavior, explaining that reporters would always follow her to write about her, as he knew the mindset of reporters well. That's why he always lived his life carefully, feeling like he was walking on eggshells. He didn't want to say anything that could harm his company. Yet, the reporters continued to follow him around, as if they wanted him to make a mistake. So he thought fame and attention would be good for him, but it turned out he was wrong. One day, during a family photo shoot, as the photo was taken, he fainted. Lee then smiled and shared that sometimes it's better to relax. Minkyung remained silent at that moment, staring at him. Lee tried to calm down the atmosphere by changing the subject to food and asked Minkyung to finish her meal. Minkyung agreed and began to eat, while also contemplating how Lee was facing more difficulties than she had realized. At the time of leaving, Minkyung asked Lee to prepare for a video call, as she would return to him by 8 a.m. Lee glanced at his watch and realized it was already 3 a.m. in the morning. Surprised, he asked if it was too early to start work. Minkyung shared that the casting had already been postponed to yesterday, making it difficult to change the date again. She reassured Lee not to worry, as the data was ready for the meeting. However, she expressed concern that if she slowed down, it could become problematic. Lee realized that it was already too late and there were only a few hours left before they had to get back to work. Out of nowhere, he suggested to Minkyung that she should just sleep in the room where they were at the time. Suddenly, Lee snapped back to his senses, furious with himself for what he had just imagined. In reality, it was all just a figment of Lee's imagination. Minkyung asked Lee if there was anything else he wanted to say or ask, but he denied it, claiming he had nothing to add, and urged her to return quickly. She left, and Lee remained in shock, still grappling with what he had imagined. He then began to grow furious with himself, wondering what was wrong with him. Perhaps his mind had been shaken up when he fainted. The next morning, Lee woke up, but despite having had a great sleep, he still felt completely exhausted. Just then, Minkyung knocked on the door of Lee's room and entered to attend the online meeting. Seeing her, Lee was stunned. Despite going through the same situation, no one could tell that she was exhausted or had gone through so much drama. He then convinced himself that it was all possible because she was none other than Minkyung. He then reflected on himself, realizing that he had said a lot of useless words yesterday. He interpreted that it might have been because of his condition, causing him to become emotional. Minkyung called Lee's name and shared with him that the morning meeting had gone well. She informed him that he didn't have any meetings for the rest of the day as they were all cancelled due to his physical condition. Lee thanked Minkyung for everything. Suddenly, Sujin arrived and asked if it was okay for them to play around the whole day. Lee was shocked to see her and asked why she had come to his place. Sujin shared that he had collapsed, which is why she came to visit him. In reality, their mother had sent her. Hearing this, Lee was even more shocked, wondering if their mother really knew about the incident. Sujin mentioned that Lee might be in trouble because their mother and brother had gone to Busan to get some medicinal herbs. Lee tensed up, as he didn't want to swallow those herbs. Minkyung was happy to hear that Lee had a good relationship with his family. Sujin then approached Minkyung, and they greeted each other. Sujin started telling Minkyung that she knew her from before, as she was the one who had won first place in the company sports competition. Lee shouted at Sujin, telling her that if she had finished her work, she could leave. However, Sujin grabbed Lee's hand and asked him to come with her. Lee asked her what else she had left to do. Sujin then started murmuring in Lee's ear, saying that she would help him. Lee asked how she would help him and in what way. She urged Lee to share everything with Minkyung, which made Lee feel a little terrified. Sujin then started running towards Minkyung and asked her to go and buy coffee together. While having coffee together, Sujin asked if Minkyung had been terrified after the incident yesterday. Minkyung agreed with her, saying she had also been tense, but now she was relieved to see Lee fine. Sujin then shared that it wasn't new for Lee to collapse, but she had never seen him this relaxed before. Minkyung became a little confused. Sujin then shared that since childhood, Lee's brother had always wanted to be the embodiment of the ideal background. She started telling about their father, mentioning that he was very greedy. However, despite his greed, he didn't attain a prominent position in the company. This led him to exploit his son and grandson to consolidate his position in the TK group. And so, her brother may have lived up to their father's expectations. However, when he turned 20, Tae-jun also entered the picture. She then asked Minkyung if she knew the story of her brother, Tae-jun. Minkyung shared that since it was a hot topic at that time, she knew a little bit about it. The eldest daughter of Siwon fell in love with an unknown volleyball player and fled with him to the United States. After living in hiding for 20 years, the existence of her hidden son was revealed with the news of her death. Sujin then shared that after the death of her aunt, her grandfather took Jun as his grandson and gave him the title as well. At that time, it was like a big lightning strike to Lee, as his dream of being the sole heir of the TK group shattered. And also, a few months ago, due to a mistake by their father, Jun acquired more than half of the company. So at that moment, Lee probably felt like his world had collapsed. Minkyung started reflecting on her mistaken thoughts about Lee, realizing that she had always harbored hate towards him. Sujin also shared that her brother might be under a lot of pressure, especially since Minkyung had sent him to work without enough rest. Minkyung apologized, expressing her understanding of the situation now. Suddenly, Sujin held Minkyung's hand and shared that it was very comforting for her to know that Deputy Director Minkyung was by her brother's side. Sujin asked if she could call Minkyung her sister. This reminded Minkyung of her twin brothers. Out of nowhere, Sujin hugged Minkyung and started crying, feeling sorry for her brother, but not knowing what to do. Minkyung asked Sujin to calm down, reassuring her that everything was okay. Sujin made a crying face and asked Minkyung what she could do in this situation. Minkyung felt a bit uncomfortable, not used to being comforted by someone's tears. Sujin, upon hearing that, became very happy. In the next scene, we saw Sujin, Minkyung, Lee, and Kimki sitting in a car, heading somewhere. There, Lee was shocked that they suddenly decided to go to Gangwon province. Minkyung then shared a lot of theories and compared them, promising to do her best to ensure he could completely rest as a reward for his hard work. Lee expressed that he couldn't have fun on the trip, as his recovery depended on him sleeping or resting for a few days. Out of nowhere, the trip felt like a sarcasm to him. Minkyung felt happy, thinking that Lee was just pretending to be unenthusiastic, but he was actually excited for the trip. She realized that she might have been putting too much pressure on him, but now she was determined to ensure that Lee would have a genuinely enjoyable time. From childhood, Kimki was responsible for organizing events and activities in school, which led to his appointment as head organizer in college. Additionally, he became the president of the self-made car club during his college years. As acknowledgement of his hard work, Kimki was appointed as the commander knight who would lead the journey. To ensure everything went smoothly, Kimki took charge of booking the venue for their trip. Minkyung also shared that she had worked very hard to prepare an itinerary for the vacation. Lee looked at them strangely and shared that he was terrified, thinking about how far they had gone in planning the course of the trip. Sujin interrupted and asked Lee to enjoy the trip, assuring him that there wouldn't be anyone else around, so she was really looking forward to it. Then, we saw the place where they were all going to stay. Kimki was impressed, noticing that the room looked exactly like the photo. He then shared details about the men's and ladies' rooms. Lee, still not entirely happy, asked if they were really going to stay and sleep there. Sujin was very excited, and Kimki commented on how the house was too big for just the four of them. Then, they started unpacking their stuff. While unpacking, Lee couldn't help but wonder that it would be his first time sharing a room with someone. So basically, the night would be horrible for him, whereas in the other room, Minkyung and Sujin were also unpacking. Sujin commented on Minkyung's bag size, remarking that it was very small. Minkyung responded that she had only brought the necessary stuff. Sujin then asked Minkyung to create the real atmosphere of a picnic. After some time, both Kimki and Lee were waiting for the ladies to get ready. When both were coming down, Lee was constantly waiting to see Minkyung. Both were looking very gorgeous, and Lee couldn't help but blush when he saw Minkyung in her dress. Lee asked the reason for them wearing those types of clothes. Sujin shared that they were just trying to create the atmosphere of a trip or picnic. She then murmured in Lee's ear, asking if he thought Minkyung's legs were amazing. Lee got stunned hearing that and asked her not to say something like that. After coming out of the house, Sujin asked all of them to split up into pairs as they didn't have enough time. Sujin decided that she would go with Kimki to do some shopping, and asked Lee and Minkyung to find something to do on their own. They both left from there, leaving Lee and Minkyung alone together. Minkyung found a place on Google, and then they went there to wander together.